outside, the cottonwoods shivered in a wind that hadn't been there a minute ago. A storm was building somewhere over the ridge, lightning flickering behind the clouds, thunder rolling so far away it almost sounded like the land groaning. The phone rang. Ted. His voice came through rough but steady. "You all right now?" I looked at Guardian, at the towel beneath him already stained rust brown. "Define all right." "Hold fast, Charlie girl. Vista Hills accounts are unraveling faster than they can hide them. Something big's about to break. Stay put and stay ready." When the call ended, I stepped outside. The night smelled like ozone and wet earth. Across the fields, the arena lights blinked once, twice, then held steady. Everything looked calm, too calm. I could feel it in my bones. The kind of stillness that comes before a storm that decides to crawl right down your throat. But I couldn't bother worrying. I had more pressing matters to concentrate on at the moment. And that took precedence over a dingbat drunk on power, control, greed. And now I find out, revenge. I shut the door behind me and leaned against the siding, letting the wind push cold air across my face. The house felt too small, too quiet, too fragile to contain what had just happened. Guardian's ragged breathing echoed in my ears even from outside. Every instinct in me screamed to pace, to move, to do something. But shock has a way of rooting your boots into the dirt and forcing you to feel every second. I hung up the phone with Ted and let the silence settle. The house felt too big, too hollow, too watchful. Guardian lay in his dog bed in the living room, wrapped in bandages and exhaustion. He lifted his head when I moved, but the motion cost him. His eyes were alert, but his body wasn't ready to act. Not yet. The ranch was exposed, and every one of us knew it. 20 minutes later, the crunch of heavy tires rolled up the driveway. Frank's truck. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stepped onto the porch. Frank didn't park by the house like usual. He eased the F-550 right up to the barn apron. Purposeful. Intentional. He climbed out, opened the rear door, and said quietly, "Come on, boy." A red and rust shape jumped down from the truck. Tall, muscular, sleek, powerful. The elegance of a Doberman wrapped over the solid, grounded frame of a Rottweiler. Amber eyes that tracked everything. Ears forward, muscles coiled but not tense. A dog who already knew his job. Frank walked him toward me, hand steady on the lead. "Charlie," he said with that low, decisive tone he only uses when he's made a move he won't apologize for. "This is Valor." Valor sat at Frank's left heel, posture perfect, gaze fixed on me like he was assessing threat level. And finding his purpose instead, I crouched slowly. "Hey there, handsome." Valor stepped forward without hesitation and pressed his forehead into my palm, firm, certain, claiming me as his person before I even caught my breath. Inside the house, Guardian lifted his head, gave a soft rumble. Not warning, a greeting, an acceptance. Valor turned, patted inside on silent pause, and lowered himself until his nose touched Guardian's cheek. Guardian exhaled and rested his head against Valor's neck. A passing of duty. A partnership born in a single breath. Frank leaned on the porch rail. "Pulled a few strings at the department," he said. "Cashed in a few favors I was saving. Valor washed out of the K-9 program. Not because he wasn't good, but because he was too good. Too protective. Wouldn't let a trainer he didn't trust within arm's reach." He shrugged. "But he took to me, and when I told them what happened here, they agreed he belonged with you. Permanently." I looked at Valor, already lying between Guardian and the doorway, watching the tree line with a stillness that wasn't calm so much as ready. "You sure he's safe around the horses?" I asked. Frank snorted. "Kid, he grew up in a mounted unit yard. Hooves are just co-workers to him." I laughed once, soft, cracked, then rested a hand on Valor's shoulder. He leaned into it like a vow. For the first time since the shot echoed across the yard, the ranch didn't feel vulnerable. It felt guarded, doubly so. And somewhere out past the fence line, whatever waited in the dark suddenly had something new to fear. It finally occurred to me as I looked across the yard. that 2 sentinels lived here now. One healing, one ready, and both are mine. Frank tugged his gloves from his back pocket and glanced toward the tree line, the way men do when they're checking for ghosts they don't trust to stay gone. Valor already ran 2 perimeter sweeps at the precinct before they released him, he said. Smart boy figured out your fence line in under 3 minutes. I raised an eyebrow. 3? Frank huffed a laugh. Yeah. Would have been 2 if he didn't stop to sniff your apple trees. Valor flicked an ear like he'd heard the compliment, then trotted ahead to the fence, nose down, shoulders rolling under his coat like a machine built for sentry work. Guardian watched him go, eyes bright, tail giving a slow sweep that told me he wasn't threatened. He was reassured. I stepped beside him, rubbing behind his ear. You've got backup now, I whispered. Take the help. You've earned it. Guardian leaned into me, the weight of him grounding something in my chest that had been floating loose since the gunshot. Frank cleared his throat softly. Guessing Ted told you the same thing I'm about to say. That I need more eyes? I asked. That you're being hunted, he corrected, not unkindly. And people who get this desperate don't stop where they started. Karen crossed a line she can't uncross. That makes her dangerous. Makes Margaret and Brian worse. The words landed hard, but true. Valor barked once, sharp, alert, then went silent, standing motionless at the top rail, staring into the dark as if reading it. Frank nodded toward him. He hears things Guardian can't while he's healing. Trust him. The yard felt bigger with Valor in it. Not emptier, not lonelier, just watched, guarded, like an old house given a second lock. Brooke stepped out onto the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Sleep still clung to her voice. Who's the new guy? Valor, I said. Her eyes softened. Good name. Then, seeing Guardian nestled at my hip, she added, He approves. Valor trotted back toward us, head high, steps soundless until he chose to let us hear he was there. He paused at the bottom of the steps and looked up, waiting, not assuming, not demanding, waiting for permission. I patted my knee gently. Come on, big man. He climbed the steps, paused again to sniff Guardian respectfully, then settled at my other side, bracketing me between them like they'd rehearsed it. 2 dogs, 2 loyalties, 2 warnings to anyone who thought darkness could walk this land unchallenged. Frank stepped back toward his truck. I'll finish the perimeter in the morning, he said. For tonight, you've got all the protection money can't buy and favors can't repay. He climbed in, engine rumbling to life, headlights sweeping across the paddocks. Valor watched him go, but didn't move from his post by my knee. Brooke exhaled a shaky breath. Feels different now, she whispered. Safer. Not safe, I said, just ready. And as the wind shifted through the cottonwoods, and Guardian pressed into my side while Valor scanned the darkness like it owed him answers, I felt the land breathe again. Steady, slow, alive. For the first time since the gunshot, I believed we might survive what was coming. Night settled heavy after Frank drove off, the kind of dark that feels like it's listening. Valor stood at the top stair for another long moment, nose lifted, chest expanding as he sampled the air. Not anxious, alert, measuring, deciding. Guardian eased down beside him, shoulder brushing Valor's paw. Even injured, he tried to match the younger dog's posture. Valor glanced at him, then did something that nearly unraveled me. He shifted just enough to give Guardian the better angle toward the yard, as if offering him command of the watch. Respect. Pure and simple. Good boys, I murmured, my voice catching more than I wanted to admit. Inside, the house felt different. Not lighter, but steadier. Less like prey. I left the porch light on and sat at the kitchen table with the paperwork Ted had insisted I start indexing. Drone photos, forged filings, HOA printouts, the growing stack of evidence showing the shape of Karen's obsession. Valor patted in behind me, nails clicking softly on tile. He didn't sniff or explore like a normal dog in a new house. Instead, he checked each doorway, each window, then came back and lay across the threshold like he was anchoring the room. Guardian curled beside him, bandaged side tucked inward, nose pressed to Valor's flank. Brooke peeked in from the hallway, whispering, "He's huge." "Big heart, too," I said. She smiled faintly. "Looks like Guardian approves." "He does." We didn't say the other truth out loud. Guardian had almost died, and this house wasn't losing another soul. Brooke headed off to finish turnout checks, while I sorted through the last of the evidence. My eyes burned from exhaustion and adrenaline still clinging like static. But before I could stand, Valor lifted his head sharply. A low sound rolled out of him, not a growl, more like a warning note being tuned. Guardian's ears pricked. I froze. Valor rose without a sound, walked to the screened front door, and stared into the yard with a stillness that made every instinct I had sit up and listen. I stepped beside him. Nothing visible. No headlights, no movement, no wind strong enough to shift the trees, but something was out there, or had been. "Anything?" I whispered. Valor didn't respond, just held the stare, long, unblinking, until whatever he'd sensed drifted too far to track. When he finally stepped back, he nudged my leg as if to say, "It's gone, for now." Guardian followed him to the bedroom, Valor positioning himself at the foot of my bed, while Guardian curled at the side like he always had. 2 sentinels, 2 shadows, 2 promises. Sleep didn't come easy, but when it finally did, it came knowing the house wasn't unguarded. Not anymore. And before dawn, before coffee, before thought even fully returned, the next phase began. Because people like Karen don't rest. They double down, then regroup. And the land always warns before it bleeds. Morning crawled in slow, heavy, the kind that pretends it's harmless until it isn't. Guardian was asleep on his bed in the kitchen, breathing steady. Valor had taken the entryway again, stretched long across the threshold like he'd been built for it. I'd barely poured coffee when gravel popped under tires. I didn't have to look. Some vehicles drive honest. Karen's always drove like a warning. The silver Escalade glinted through the window, followed by the same 2 rent-a-thugs she tried to dress up as security. They climbed out looking like they'd practiced intimidation poses in a mirror. Valor was on his feet before I set the mug down. I stepped onto the porch as Karen strutted up the steps, waving a stack of papers like a queen announcing a decree. "Well," she chirped, "I certainly hope you've started packing. The lien is being processed as we speak. Unpaid dues, outstanding fines, and," she added with a sugary tilt, "unauthorized dangerous animals now present on the property without approval." I blinked once. "Dangerous animals?" "Yes," she said brightly. "That large brown thing." Valor stepped into the doorway. Not charging, not growling, just standing, a wall in dog form. Karen's smile slipped like wet paint. "That large brown thing," I said, "is a working dog, legally owned, legally registered, and none of your damn business. And your lien is fraudulent. Again." "Oh, these?" I held out a hand as she extended the stack of new fines. She placed them in my palm like she'd just handed me a subpoena. I tore them in half and dropped them at her feet. Her jaw clicked. Her goons moved at the same time, stepping toward the porch like they meant to grab me. They didn't get close. Valor exploded off the top step with a speed that belonged in a training video. He didn't touch them. Didn't need to. He hit the ground with a thunderous smack of paws against dirt and launched into a warning charge that stopped an inch from the first man's knee. The man stumbled backward so fast he tripped over his own feet. The second one froze, hands in the air. Valor's body was coiled but controlled, silent, teeth unseen, eyes locked, message delivered, as if to say, "Approach her and I'll end your day." Guardian, bandaged but fierce, stood in the doorway beside me and let out a low, rumbling endorsement. Karen shrieked and jumped behind her own SUV door, like her men weren't even human shields anymore. "Get that beast under control!" she screeched. "He is under control," I said. Yours aren't. Valor held the line until I murmured, "With me." He turned instantly, clean, surgical obedience, and came back to my side. Her goons didn't move until he passed them. Karen slammed her car door as if it could shield her from reality. "This isn't over, you hear me, Hale?" She shrilled through the window before peeling out so fast she fishtailed. I exhaled. "Valor," I said softly. He came and leaned into my leg. Not seeking praise, just checking in. The yard went quiet again, but not for long. 10 minutes later, another engine rolled up. Slow, respectful, official. Sheriff Whitmore's cruiser. Behind it, a white van with bold black lettering. Animal Control, County Unit 12. A man stepped out of the van. Mid-50s, calm face, wearing the kind of boots that had seen more cruelty than comfort. He joined Whitmore at the bottom of the porch. Guardian and Valor stood on either side of me, silent as statues. "Morning, Charlene," Whitmore said, eyes narrowed at the torn fines still blowing on the ground. "We need to talk." The animal control officer tipped his hat. "Ma'am, we received a report from Vista Hills HOA claiming you're harboring aggressive, unlicensed attack animals and operating an unsafe facility." He looked at Valor, who stared back with quiet, unmoving intelligence, then at Guardian, sporting his bandage, and the man's entire expression changed. "It seems," he said dryly, "that the report was exaggerated." I folded my arms. You think? Try exaggerated by a pathological liar?" "By a habitual one," Whitmore corrected. And this time she filed it as an emergency complaint. My stomach dropped, but slowly. Not in fear, but in recognition. They weren't stopping. They were escalating. The officer crouched in front of Valor, careful, respectful. "Mind if I take a closer look? Just basic temperament assessment?" Valor didn't even blink. He stepped forward and sat, posture perfect, like he knew the drill. The officer nodded. "Solid, well-trained, registered?" "Frank handled the paperwork," I said. "Came straight from the PD kennel." "Then he's legitimate." The officer stood, dusting his hands. "Whoever filed the complaint lied on a government form. Jail offense if we choose to push it." Whitmore lifted a brow at me. "We pushing it?" I looked at my dogs, one healing, one newly arrived, both ready to defend. "Yes," I said. "We're pushing everything from now on." Whitmore's jaw tightened with approval. "Good, because this stops when she's done, or when she's in cuffs. And something tells me she's not stopping." The animal control officer nodded toward the pastures. "I'll document everything on my end. Clean bill of health, no aggression issues, no violations." He walked back to his van. Whitmore stayed on the porch step, lowering his voice. "Charlie, be ready. If she's calling in false reports now, the next move won't be paperwork." Valor stepped closer to me, placing himself between the sheriff and the yard. Not aggressive, but guarding the line. Whitmore smirked. "Smart dog." "He is," I said. He tipped his hat. "Call me the second anything feels off." As the vehicles pulled away, Valor lifted his head toward the tree line again, listening to something distant, something coming. And deep down, so did I, because Karen didn't retreat. She doubled down, and whatever she planned next would test every defense we had. Valor stayed at the porch rail long after the sheriff's taillights disappeared, muscles tight beneath his coat, ears pivoting like radar. Guardian eased up beside him, leaning just enough to share the vigil. The yard looked calm, but the calm felt staged, brittle, as if the whole property was holding its breath with us. Even the cottonwoods had gone still, their leaves frozen mid-rustle. I could feel the shift, that subtle pull in the air when trouble changes direction instead of ending. Karen hadn't backed off. She'd simply moved her next move out of sight. And animals always sense the storm before the people do. Somewhere down the road, an engine started, then faded. A dog barked once, then nothing. The world wasn't normal, but it was pretending to be. And that was worse somehow. That quiet told me Karen wasn't done, just gone silent. And Karen silent was more dangerous than Karen shouting on my porch. When a person built on control stops speaking, it isn't because they've surrendered. It's because they're repositioning. Words had done all they could for her. Whatever came next wouldn't be spoken. It would be done. And for a short while, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath right along with her. The silence didn't last. Quiet never does when a narcissist feels cornered. For 2 weeks, there were no notes, no pamphlets, no forum posts, just the kind of stillness that smells like gasoline before a match. Then it started small. A broken latch on the back gate one morning. A new padlock on the feed room that nobody from my crew put there. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged, just little intrusions meant to whisper, "We can still reach you." Ted called it Phase 2. They've switched from intimidation through rumor to intimidation through presence, he said. They're telling you the fence isn't a boundary anymore. He doubled the cameras, set motion lights on every angle of the barns, and hired a night shift hand to stay on site. Marla filed notice with the county sheriff documenting each incident. Every new violation went into a fresh binder tab labeled Trespass, Phase 2. Karen still hadn't resurfaced online, but we could feel her. Orchestrators don't have to be visible to be dangerous. The pattern becomes their signature. I had stopped waiting for the next move and started timing it, because once you know an enemy's rhythm, you can decide when to break it. The next strike wasn't random. It was timed for when the farm was most vulnerable, early morning, before staff arrived, when the only people on site were the horses and the cameras Ted had mounted. The north barn door was found propped open with a brick that hadn't been there the night before. Nothing was taken, again, but the implication was clear. Entry is possible, anytime we choose. Ted reviewed the footage frame by frame. Whoever did it knew where the cameras were. They stayed just outside the angles, slipping in at the blind spots between sensor arcs. Not sloppy, not impulsive, calculated. "This isn't kids," Ted said. "This is someone rehearsing." He wasn't talking about trespassing. He was talking about conditioning. Conditioning me, conditioning my staff, conditioning the animals, conditioning everyone to expect intrusion, so that when the intrusion becomes damage, shock is already worn down. That is how you prepare a target to accept violation. You normalize presence first. Marla didn't soften her response. She added the footage to the case file and updated the sheriff's record. "We don't intervene yet," she said. "We build the chain." Lesser minds think attacks begin with the attack itself. Smarter people know they begin with rehearsal. And whoever was rehearsing was getting bolder. The first undeniable sabotage hit 3 days later. The main water line feeding the east paddocks was deliberately severed, not unscrewed, not shut off, cut. A clean blade slice through reinforced hose, done low to the ground where it wouldn't be seen until the troughs ran dry. Horses don't scream when something like that happens. They just stand and wait. That's what makes sabotage of livestock operations so insidious. The damage hides in silence. Ted crouched over the cut line, studied it the way he once studied crime scenes. "This wasn't vandalism," he said. "This was intent." Marla didn't debate it. She filed the first formal incident as criminal property interference and notified the sheriff's department that escalation had begun. The officer who showed up did what officers always do at stage 1. Wrote it down like it was a neighborly misunderstanding, not a prelude. That's the problem with early sabotage. It still looks minor to people who don't live with consequences. But Ted didn't underestimate it. "Cutting utilities is Phase 3, he said. "Next comes direct impact, animals, equipment, or fire." He said it without emotion, the way a surgeon names a procedure. And I knew he was right. Because attacks don't plateau, they climb. The breach came on a Tuesday night, just after 2 a.m. The cameras caught motion near the South Arena fence line. Not a shadow passing by. not an animal. A human figure moving with purpose. They stayed low, hugging the perimeter, checking for blind spots the way someone does when they've done this before. The ranch hand on night duty heard the gravel shift and went out with a flashlight. The moment the beam swept the fence line, the figure bolted, not drunk stumbling, not startled wandering, running with coordination and intent, straight toward the road where a vehicle was already idling with its headlights off. By the time the sheriff arrived, the only thing left was tire tracks. This time the deputy's tone was different. Trespass with a vehicle waiting implied planning, and planning implies conspiracy, not mischief. He asked for copies of the footage for further review, which was department speak for someone higher up is about to see this. Ted stood beside him the entire time, arms crossed. "They're probing response time," he told the deputy, testing how long it takes for someone to intercept. The deputy didn't argue, because rehearsals stop being rehearsals when backup cars start waiting with engines running. The next move we all knew would not be rehearsal. It would be execution. You can feel the night before something breaks. The air goes still in a way that isn't weather, it's intention. The staff moved quieter that day without knowing why. Even the horses were restless, pacing in turnout like they sensed pressure coming through the ground. Ted didn't bother pretending otherwise. They've tested access, visibility, and response. The next hit will be destructive. Marla didn't argue. She prepared. She pre-drafted the emergency injunction paperwork so that the moment the attack occurred, the legal trigger could be pulled without delay. Ted ran final checks on cameras and lighting, like a man setting a trap rather than guarding property. I remember standing in the aisle that evening, listening to the sound of horses chewing hay, and realizing I was listening to the last normal night. Peace has a sound, and once you learn war, you never hear that sound the same way again. Just after midnight, the motion alerts pinged again. Not one camera, but 3 in sequence, moving along the west pasture line. Whoever was out there wasn't scouting anymore. They were advancing. The notification history became a countdown rather than a log. By the time the breach reached the edge of the main barn, the phase Ted had warned about, the one beyond rumor and presence and rehearsal, had begun. That night marked the last moment this was still an HOA dispute. By the time the sun rose, it would no longer be civil, it would be criminal. 3 days later was like any other day. The sun was rising over the east tree lines, the sky turning a peach and pink, with thin clouds streaking the morning sky. Rhonda came into Grayson's barn at 6 a.m., same as every morning. Hoodie half-zipped, hair shoved into a messy knot, coffee steaming in the cold air, and the feed cart rattling softly down the aisle. And the horses were waking up, tossing their heads and nickering as she tossed hay and measured grain, their breaths hanging like fog in the early light. Everything was completely normal until she reached Alfie's stall. He wasn't at the door. He wasn't pacing or stomping. He wasn't stretching his neck out demanding food like he always did. He wasn't moving at all. "Alfie?" she whispered. She slid his stall door open. He stood pressed into the far back corner, trembling violently. His left hind leg was pulled tight up under his belly, refusing to bear any weight. His breathing came in short, panicked bursts. Rhonda took a step around him to see what was wrong, and nearly dropped the feed scoop. A deep, brutal slash ran across the inside of his stifle, high beneath the flank where no horse could injure himself. Muscle was torn open. Superficial tendon fibers were sliced clean through. Dried blood had run down his leg during the night. "Oh God, baby," Rhonda whispered, her voice cracking. Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped her phone. She didn't call Charlie. She didn't call Ted. She called Frank. "Rhonda," he answered immediately, hearing the panic. "Frank, please. Alfie's hurt. Someone cut him. It's deep. His stifle, he can barely stand. It's bad, Frank. It's real bad. Please hurry." "Don't move him," Frank said sharply. "I'll be there in 1 minute." And he was. He sprinted into the barn, slid into the stall, and the second he saw the wound, his face changed, pale, then hard with fury. "This wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "Someone came in here and did this deliberately. Stay with him. I'm calling Dr. Keon." Rhonda wrapped her arms around Alfie's neck, whispering through tears as he trembled and shook so violently it rattled the stall walls. Frank called Dr. Keon with clipped, urgent frustration in his voice. When Dr. Keon arrived minutes later, he went straight into the stall, crouched, and examined the wound carefully. His jaw tightened. "This is deep," he said. "Muscle laceration, partial tendon involvement. He needs surgery immediately." Rhonda broke. "Will he make it?" "He has a chance," Keon said. "But only if we get him to the hospital right now." He wrapped the wound in a thick compression bandage, layers of gauze, padding, and sterile tape spiraling high around the stifle to stabilize the torn tissues. Every time Alfie tried to shift, he gasped and his entire body shook. Frank ran to get the truck and trailer while Rhonda stayed with Alfie, stroking his neck with trembling hands. It took sedation and 3 people to load him. Every step made him cry out, "You're okay. You're okay. Mama's right here." Rhonda whispered over and over, her voice breaking. Frank drove. Rhonda stayed in the trailer with Alfie. Charlie was called only after Frank and Quian as they pulled out of the ranch driveway. At the equine hospital, the surgeons rushed Alfie straight into surgery. Inside, the damage was worse than expected. Muscle was shredded, the tendon sheath compromised, blood loss significant. "Someone did this with intent," the surgeon told them. "This was meant to cripple him." Rhonda collapsed into Frank's arms, sobbing. Surgery lasted 4 hours. When Alfie was finally out, the vets warned Rhonda about the most dangerous complications that could follow stifle surgery. He could not put any weight on the injured leg. If he shifted too much onto his opposite hind limb, it could develop support limb laminitis, a life-ending complication. Rhonda nodded through tears. "I'll stay with him. I won't leave him." And she didn't. Despite constant care, tall mats, ice therapy, pain medication, sling support, Alfie struggled to keep weight off the injured leg. 2 weeks later, on day 14, exhausted and hurting, he shifted too much onto the opposite hind, and that leg gave out. Heat flooded the hoof. His digital pulse hammered. He rocked in agony, unable to lie down, unable to rest, drowning in pain. Rhonda stayed with him day and night. Frank stayed with her. By day 16, the coffin bone had begun to rotate. The vet placed a gentle hand on Rhonda's shoulder. "He's suffering. There's no reversing this now. The kindest thing we can do for him now is to let him go." Rhonda broke. She cradled Alfie's head in her lap as Dr. Keon sedated him, kissing his forehead through tears. "You're my good boy. Mama's right here. Mama loves you." Frank stood behind her with a trembling hand on her shoulder, devastated. When the final injection was given, Alfie leaned his head into Rhonda one last time. He took one last breath and released, then closed his eyes, and he was gone. Rhonda collapsed over him, screaming into his neck. Frank wrapped her in his arms and held her as she shook violently, sobbing into his shoulder. When Rhonda could finally speak, Frank called Charlie. Charlie called Ted. Ted's voice was cold steel. "This was deliberate animal torture, coordinated, multi-jurisdictional trespass. This isn't HOA harassment anymore." He didn't hesitate. "We're calling Sheriff Whitmore, and after this, we're updating the FBI." Because whoever slashed Alfie's stifle was no longer just a nuisance. They were a criminal, escalating predator, and they had just crossed a line that could never be undone.